Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, September 15th, 2017. We're off to the races, and I'm out to the first beginning. Fast start out of the gate, and I'm in the lead at the first turn. Secretariat hard behind, and, okay, never mind. I don't know. I sort of started things off with a horse race cadence there, and cracked myself up. Well, that's a good start to a Friday morning, considering what could have happened. Twitter aflame once again this morning. So many things we could be turning to. Do we focus our attention worldwide and talk about the latest North Korea missile launch? Or do we turn to poor Ivanka and the troubles she's having, the tremendous difficulties involved in being the first daughter? Nepotism is a terrible thing, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of good reason to stay away from, or at least think twice about making appointments based on nepotism, and a lot of that being put in evidence by Ivanka over the last day and a half. I could probably do a whole show about that. That's rarely going to be worth anyone's time, but I think there's some points to be made about that. Other things happening, of course. Steve Mnuchin and his wife still very upset about having been caught mooching off the government, or at least trying to. I saw a clip of Steve Mnuchin responding to questions about his use of the government plane, of course, for his little day trip to Kentucky, and then, of course, the allegations that he tried to, and there are more than allegations, he did try to get a government plane to take him on his honeymoon. I had an interesting spin about the best thing you could put on something like this was that I didn't use this plane. Everyone's reporting that I tried to use this plane. I didn't use this plane. He tried to. He just didn't get it successfully done. And if I had, I would have paid for it. And that's possible. I mean, I don't really believe that he would have paid for it until he was caught on it. But, usually when you take a plane for purposes like that and it ends up being a personal trip, you're supposed to reimburse the government. Or if you take a plane like that for political purposes, you're supposed to reimburse the government, and very often they do catch up with you on that, and they might have made him pay, and it would have been a terrible thing because he's a billionaire. Where is his plane? Does he not have one? I mean, he could have chartered one for all this, but of course, well, we know why he didn't, and I suppose I know why he didn't, and I may be wrong about this, but I think his wife wanted that picture. He may also have wanted that picture. It doesn't seem out of keeping with his character. But she seemed the more interested of the two, as she was the one who Instagrammed it. But I don't know. Perhaps if he were still a private citizen, he would have felt free to have Instagrammed it himself. I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm putting too much of this on his wife. I can already feel it. But I thought that was pretty remarkable, really. And he's all upset about it. And I saw this much circulated tweet in response to it. Steve Mnuchin actually put out on his own Twitter account here, "I didn't use a government plane on my honeymoon, and if I had, I would have paid for it myself. Hashtag fake news." Of course, he is answered here by Salvador Hernandez, who is a BuzzFeed News reporter, or debunker of fake at BuzzFeed News. He says, of course, literally no one reported you used the plane. The reports were that you requested it. That is an important distinction. But, of course, more to the story, I think, was the fact that he almost got away with no one reporting anything about his request for use of the plane on his honeymoon, too. The only way they got caught on it, well, I mean, it's possible that there might have been an investigation. And there's still some question, by the way, over whether or not the trip to Kentucky triggered the investigation of his request for use of the plane on his honeymoon, or whether there was already a honeymoon request investigation underway. I have seen it reported in ways that imply both, and I am not sure which one I give more credit to. It should be the case that there was already an investigation over his request for the plane for the honeymoon, but I don't necessarily believe that actually happened. I think it was probably long overdue and prompted by the Kentucky investigation, and I guess that's a good thing. Terrible for you, though. But, the bigger part of the story, I think, for the crying about people are fake news about me using the plane for my honeymoon. The big news is that what really happened here is you almost got away with requesting the plane too, but your wife blabbed about your Kentucky trip, and that got you caught. And then your wife tried to stick it in someone's eye for catching you when, of course, she put that out there on her Instagram account. Look at me. I'm coming back from a big shopping trip, and even down to the brands that she bought and with the government plane in the background. It's really kind of sick and sad. And I think a lot of other people observed, as I did yesterday, really indicative of the mindset of Trump and the Trump people, the people Trump brought with him to Washington, that this guy would come from the corporate world and think, for all the rhetoric about being able to shake things up and we're going to take a different approach because we're outsiders to government. And I mean, I guess it is a different approach to government, looting it, but it's not that different from a lot of the way a lot of people approach government, I guess. But I guess it's different from government as it's been run for the most part to date, but it's no different from their corporate lives. What they're saying is we're going to, and I guess that's what the rhetoric promises is that they'll bring their corporate practices to the government, and we always kind of made fun of that premise because so much of corporate culture is itself corrupt and inappropriate, but it doesn't get prosecuted or exposed even usually in the same way that corruption in government does, because we've grown up in a culture where it's generally thought to be a virtuous thing for journalists to uncover corruption anywhere, but corruption in government affects us all. Corruption in corporate life, some have been led to believe anyway, affects only a narrow subsection of society. I guess they've been led to believe that it's the shareholders who are affected. Of course, I think lots of us here have a broader view of what effect corporate corruption can have, and I think that's the more proper view of it. Of course, all the customers are affected, and the supply chain is affected, and we're all affected, especially if it's a very large corporation and it models its behavior for other corporations, and they get the idea that it's okay to do things that are corrupt in one way or another. Anyway, we all, at least we all generally agree that government corruption is a bigger story and a bigger picture, a more important item. And we always made fun of the idea that if you just transferred corporate culture to government, you would be bringing with you all sorts of horrible practices. And probably none of the famed efficiency that private enterprise is supposed to have as an advantage over public work. I don't know if that really exists, but the myth is certainly there. But generally speaking, corporate decision makers operate with a lot less accountability and something a lot more akin to impunity, with the business decision rule, etc., out there protecting them from personal liability when they make these decisions. Not necessarily the same thing going on in government, but I guess to top it all off, you can bring over all the horrible aspects of big corporate governance. Although, again, actual big corporate governance, like Fortune 500 company governance, brings with it a lot more accountability than the administration of a family business or a personally owned sole proprietorship, even if it's gigantic, like, by comparison. Maybe, possibly. Maybe it's not even all that gigantic. Like when we're talking about the Trump organization, he was always accountable to no one. So several ways to misapply the rhetorical lesson, the rhetorical argument that it would be a good idea to bring somebody over from the business world. And one of the things they bring with them is corporate privilege. When you get to be a big wig and a Goldman Sachs guy and a Hollywood guy like Steve Mnuchin, you bring him over into government, and he initially sees nothing wrong with putting the resources of the business, in this case the government, to work for you personally because you are company brass. It never occurred to you that you shouldn't even ask to take a government plane on your freaking honeymoon, which is, as Ron Wyden said, forehead-slapping stuff. But, I need to be in secure connection. I have to have secure communications with the White House. The White House doesn't care what you say, one thing. But, of course, how could I possibly have secure communications with America from Scotland or France or Italy? They're so backward. How could I have, there's embassies, maybe. You remember those embassies that you wanted to use, the Russian embassies, to talk to Russia securely? That was the other guy. Sure. Anyway, I don't know, whatever. He fooled himself into believing that he was entitled to this thing, and now he finds out he's not. And he can't blame his wife for it. That'll cause problems at home. I think I understand that. Actually, but it's quite amazing how this came to pass, and I thought it made a good parallel yesterday. We spent a lot of time on it, how the dodges and the way they duck and weave around allegations of their own wrongdoing ends up contorting them in such ways that they end up jamming their own foot further into their mouth, just the way accusing Susan Rice of improperly unmasking Trump campaign officials so that they could distract from Trump's idiotic claim that Trump Tower had been bugged by Obama for political reasons. That allegation ends up backfiring and revealing a whole new world of problems and corruption. We didn't get all the way through, by the way, yesterday's description of what the ever-loving Michael Flynn was up to with this idea of the Marshall Plan for nuclear power plants for the Middle East. And maybe we should return to that before beating up further on Ivanka Trump. And maybe that means I'll forget about that and not get back to it. But I'll hold Ivanka Trump in reserve and in contempt, of course. And get back to that. I shouldn't be too judgmental. I don't know. Yom Kippur is coming. She's got her own problems, I think. But she deserves it. There's a lot going on out there. All right. So yesterday, we were talking about Michael Flynn's involvement in this whole mess of the meeting with the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates. And I now realize that I didn't do the homework I was supposed to do. I have so much going on. It's a very busy time, ladies and gentlemen. Please forgive me, but let's do the work here. But Michael Flynn being involved in anything is problematic because, as you know, he is a spy, and we've known this for quite some time. Why do I say this? Those of you who might be new to the show or shocked by my having tweeted back in November that Michael Flynn was a spy, I'm referring initially to his famed incident while he was in the Defense Intelligence Agency, by which I mean heading the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was working in the Pentagon, because that's where they work. And in the Pentagon, as in some other government installations, they have some pretty strict rules about internet access. And apparently the deal was that in your office there as Defense Intelligence Agency head, you weren't supposed to have an unauthorized, anyway, internet connection in your office because it makes it just too damn easy to upload stuff that shouldn't be leaving the Pentagon and email it or whatever else to people who shouldn't be getting it. Like, I don't know, Russia or Turkey or whoever happens to be paying you at the moment. And that's a counter-espionage measure. It's just, let's not make it super easy for them to effortlessly share defense secrets and intelligence secrets with people who ought not to be getting it, even if they think that giving it to them or preventing it from being given to the people they want to give it to is just stupid bureaucratic red tape because they're our friends anyway, or whatever your idiotic logic might lead you to believe. The rule was, no, you can't have it. But, of course, he thought, I'm a powerful general, and I know all sorts of interesting things, and I've made it to the top ranks of the military. I'm going to do it anyway. Not really stopping to think that, hey, this puts me under suspicion of being a spy. That's why this rule exists, so that I won't do that and won't put myself in danger of being suspected of being a spy. But what the hell, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. He got fired from that job. And that made him anti-Obama because he was angry because he got fired by the commander-in-chief, essentially. And so, therefore, anything that will hurt Obama is good for me, and what's good for me is good for the United States of America, and I'm going to back a incompetent moron for president, and I'm going to do everything I can to make him president, and in the meantime, I'm going to solicit as many new espionage clients as I possibly can, line my pockets, and then line them even more by announcing to the espionage market that I have the ear of a moron president. Please give me money and I will get you your ridiculous program passed through, because this guy's head is empty and I can fill it with whatever you want for as low as $25,000 a year. He's a cheap spy. So in addition to this stupid thing, and in addition to all of what we found out in the last couple of months about Flynn being paid by Turkey, Flynn being paid by a couple other sources too, and not disclosing it, which is government bureaucratese for I'm guilty of espionage, basically, we have a new one. And that is that the one we talked about yesterday, that the Crown Prince of the UAE, United Arab Emirates, for some reason breaks all protocol, comes to the United States without informing the United States government that he's visiting. That raises suspicion. They follow. They figure out what he's doing. They find out who he's meeting with. They report it to the National Security Agency, the head of the National Security Agency, the National Security Advisor, who's maybe not actually the head of the National Security Agency now that I think about it, but the National Security Advisor, who makes extensive use of the work product of the National Security Agency, sees the report and says, Crown Prince UAE breaks protocol. That's weird. Why did he do it? Well, he was having a meeting. Well, we ought to find out who the meeting was with. Well, it was in New York. Really? And it was in Trump Tower. Oh. What would he be doing? I mean, I guess it's transition time, but why wouldn't he announce that? Everyone knows that it's transition time. There's really no reason not to announce your plans to visit and simply just say you're going to visit with the transition team. Something else must be afoot here. Who did he meet with? And it was Hope Hicks. I don't know. So she unmasks the names. We read extensively yesterday about how the congressional investigators, came to the conclusion that there was absolutely nothing improper even about that, much less illegal about that. She was doing her job, and nothing terrible resulted from it. I guess they're still not sure how it got to the press that the three names that were unmasked were Michael Flynn, Jared Kushner, and Steve Bannon. And I guess they want to continue to find out what they can about that. But what was that meeting about? We still don't know. But then we have the circumstantial evidence of a meeting taking place shortly thereafter in the Seychelles Islands, brokered by this same crown prince, and bringing together a Vladimir Putin crony and Eric Prince, brother of Betsy DeVos, Trump's education secretary, a huge donor in his own right, and of course a huge donor in her own right to the Trump campaign. Very big allies, and Prince, denies that he was there as a Trump proxy, and he says he was only there for business. So what business was being discussed? Well, again, here we don't know. But then we have the circumstantial evidence of this strange proposed business / government venture of essentially privatizing America's nuclear nonproliferation activities and looking to make a profit off of it, and Michael Flynn wanted a cut of it. Michael Flynn and possibly Eric Prince involved in all of this, and of course some of these things were to be built in the UAE, and we're having to suppose what the connective tissue is here on all this stuff, and it's kind of weird and uncomfortable and difficult to know for sure what's going on, but hey, that's why you investigate such things, right? We read yesterday what this crazy ass plan actually was, but I didn't finish reading the entirety of the plan, and so maybe we ought to go back and finish up the rest of it, because I thought some of the really strange things were yet to come. I had found it. I guess we were reading yesterday we were reading the Politico article that described this plan, or this meeting. Flynn-backed for-profit nuclear scheme inside Trump transition. Remember, this was the Josh Dawsey piece. We sort of skimmed through it, I think. It was a September 12th piece. The Trump advisor pushed for a, quote, Marshall Plan for Middle East nuclear power after he was hired by its private sponsors. It referenced a Newsweek article and also linked to a copy of the actual Marshall Plan proposal, which we looked at. But I don't know if we read this. Did we read this article aloud? As a top official on President Donald Trump's transition team, former Army Lieutenant General Michael Flynn actively promoted a private sector scheme to build dozens of nuclear reactors across the Middle East, known informally in the transition as the Marshall Plan. But he did not publicly disclose that backers of the plan had paid him at least $25,000. Flynn communicated during the transition with the backers of the for-profit plan, billed as a way of strengthening ties between the U.S. and Arab allies looking to develop nuclear power capability. Meanwhile, the Trump advisor expressed his support for the plan with people inside the transition and discussed its merits with others beyond Trump Tower, according to sources within and close to the Trump team at that time. Flynn's consulting work for the company has been previously reported, but not the extent of his involvement during the Trump transition, nor the full amount he was paid for it. Flynn first publicly disclosed his consulting work for the Virginia-based venture Exco Dynamics/Iron Bridge Group. Remember the reference to this arrangement being an iron bridge somehow to the Middle East. I don't know what that is, but that was, I guess they slipped it in there because that's the name of their project. Anyway, he first disclosed this consulting work in a February 11th federal filing, 2 days before he resigned as White House National Security Advisor. That group at the time was working with ACU, a separate entity pushing the project. Flynn did not specify how much he had been paid, and it's unclear whether he had previously disclosed that work to White House officials. Robert Kellner, a Flynn lawyer, declined to comment. This does sound familiar, yeah? Flynn has not been accused of wrongdoing in the matter. I'll do it. And it's unclear whether he faces any legal liability, but the new details underscore the way Flynn seemed to commingle his private consulting work prior to Trump's election and his semi-official duties afterwards, something that has drawn legal scrutiny and created political headaches for a Trump White House that granted him access to the government's deepest secrets. Congressional investigators and special counsel Robert Mueller are investigating Flynn's activities during the Trump transition as part of their larger probes into potential Russian influence in the 2016 election. They include his failure to disclose payments he took from Russian companies, that's how he got into this, in 2015, and for 2016 lobbying work funded by a businessman with close ties to Turkey's government. Democratic lawmakers are also looking into Flynn's involvement in the reactor project. Representatives Elijah Cummings and Elliot Engel sent a letter dated Tuesday to Flynn's lawyers and executives involved in the reactor plan requesting information on communications with Flynn. The pair said they were concerned that when Flynn renewed his security clearance in 2016, he did not disclose trips related to this project or other meetings with foreigners. Federal investigators have questioned others in the wider Russian probe about Flynn activities during the transition that may have overlapped with undisclosed business work. A spokesman for the special counsel's office declined to comment. Transition official said the transition was not aware of any investigation into Flynn. They're not even aware of the investigation. Really? Exco Dynamics and Iron Bridge have closed. ACU representatives could not be reached for comment. A lawyer representing Rear Admiral Michael Hewitt, the former CEO of Exco Dynamics / Iron Bridge, and his new company, IP3, did not respond to multiple requests for comment. Messages left at Hewitt's new firm Tuesday were not returned. Neither Hewitt nor his companies have been accused of wrongdoing or legal liability. Just getting that out of the way. Flynn's February report to the Federal Office of Government Ethics, as if that were worth anything, disclosed that he advised Exco / Iron Bridge from August 2015 to December of 2016. Flynn's role in the so-called Marshall Plan does not appear tied to potential Russian election interference, but Mueller's examination of Flynn's transition activities unnerves Trump officials who fear a wide-ranging investigation that finds wrongdoing in places far from where it started. Yes. A person familiar with the investigation said Mueller's team seems particularly interested in Flynn's post-November actions. The Marshall Plan, a reference to the post-World War II U.S. plan to rebuild Europe, which was actually a serious undertaking versus this, took its name from an ambitious business proposal obtained by Newsweek in June. That's what we were reading yesterday. Well, part of it we didn't get to yesterday that's very interesting, so we'll make sure that we get to it today. Perhaps we can conclude with this article and read you the exciting conclusion that didn't make it onto air yesterday from the business proposal itself. But of course, that music reminds us that it's nearly time for us to pause for our first break for station identification on today's Kagro in the Morning show. That upcoming. We'll continue with this afterwards. There's much more to come. Please do stay tuned. Don't run away just because we're giving everyone a chance to identify themselves. Everyone deserves that opportunity. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Thanks for waiting with us through our first break. I think we're really getting these things down. What do you think, Justice? You may even be able to take a nap during the show and leave all the timing to us. One of these days I intend to study the automation process that will make this even easier. We might be able to even let you take a nap for reals during the whole thing. It would be nice. It's nice to have backup, though, and really figure out what's going on and be certain everything's working. Got some changes that I have in mind for the process for all this, a lot suggested by Scott Anderson, and I need to get on the stick in making them happen. But never mind that. Let's get back to the incredibly ambitious, overly ambitious named, over-ambitiously named Marshall Plan nuclear power / privatization of non-proliferation scheme underway here. The Marshall Plan, of course, stole its name from the actual serious Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II. But that's a pretty good name then to borrow for building a couple of nuclear power plants in the middle of the biggest oil reserves in the world. Whatever. By the way, yeah, so, I mean, they have a ton of oil that they can pretty much used to provide for all their own energy needs, though they're increasing, doubtless, and huge expanses of desert where the sun just beats down relentlessly day in and day out. How could they possibly produce power in a manner alternative to the burning of fossil fuels? I can't think of anything. Seems like there would be something for them to do besides nuclear power, but nuclear power is really cool and stuff, and those buildings look really awesome, and radiation poisoning is fun, and people like that. So maybe we'll bring that modern-looking thing. I could see where the governments might, for some reason, say, that's the hallmark of a modern society. I want one of those. Now, I think pretty soon the hallmark of a modern society is going to be solar farms, and for some reason they'll put themselves way behind on that. I don't know why they would do that. Really, nuclear power plants, the profile of a nuclear power plant rising out of the landscape is really actually very 1970s, 1980s to me. But what do I know? I'm not an Emirati citizen. Anyway, so that was the deal. They were going to build all these plants all over the place. And as the proposal would have it, that would bring economic development, jobs, security, stability, and shared prosperity to the region. How much security and stability, I am not sure. It might actually be a negative, net negative. But, well, They're entitled to dream, aren't they? Well, many Trump transition officials were unfamiliar with this idea because it's esoteric, stupid, and very narrowly focused, and probably the worst idea I've heard about in a long, long time, which I think becomes obvious once you finish reading the proposal, which we didn't do yesterday. But I hinted at on Twitter afterwards when I glanced down and found this nugget, which I'll tell you about in a minute. This, of course, they're unfamiliar with the idea. It's senseless. But that's really part of the problem here is almost everybody's unfamiliar with the idea, but Flynn is familiar with the idea because he's been paid $25,000 to promote the idea within these circles where hardly anybody else knows anything about it. And really hardly anybody else knows anything about anything at all. But they need topics to be able to discuss with foreign dignitaries who actually do know things so that they don't look like complete morons. And they're only too thankful to be handed things that sound like really sophisticated and interesting. So guess what? Once again, we find out exactly what the value of putting a spy / lobbyist in the middle of a bunch of empty-headed morons with no ideas of their own really is. He could have gotten a lot more than $25,000, but at least he's modest about things. That's a virtue. We'll put that in his sentencing letter. So they were unfamiliar with the idea, which never ended up becoming part of any administration policy statement. High-level discussions led by Flynn took place for at least several weeks anyway. As described in the original proposal, the plan envisioned funding by Middle East governments, at no cost to U.S. taxpayers, just like the Iraq War. The ambitious vision had prominent backers with military backgrounds, so you know it's patriotic. The EXCO Iron Bridge Board included former National Security Agency Director and retired General Keith Alexander and retired Marine Corps General James Hoss Cartwright, former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But it seems to have gone nowhere after its most powerful advocate, Flynn, was busted as a spy, or rather was fired 24 days into the Trump administration for misleading Vice President Mike Pence about his communications with Russia's ambassador to the United States. That's how we got here. Another accidental foot and mouth situation. Yeah, you should look at Susan Rice's unmasking. Why? Because that would lead us to Flynn's espionage? No. Too bad. That's where we find ourselves. So what did we learn about that? Well, there's the proposal itself, which I guess should we save that and read the Newsweek article? Instead, I went back and I looked up the Newsweek article just to see what they had to say because we missed it the first time around. I grabbed it here. Let's see if there's anything new in it. Jeff Stein is the writer here for Newsweek. This is a June 9th piece this year. Oops. Oh, right. The auto-playing video. I forgot. And Newsweek makes it really hard to find it and kill it. And I'm hoping you'll have to tweet me if it's continuing because it's still rolling. I have silenced it on my screen, but there's literally like no stop or shut up button in this little video window, which is amazing to me. But, well, it's par for the course for terrible, terrible media organizations like I guess Newsweek is. You just earned this terrible, terrible designation. Okay. Oh, wait, there's the... Okay, now if you scroll back up, if you scroll down into the story past the window where they initially embed the video, a lot of these sites will then put it in a miniaturized window that they stick down in the lower corner there, but usually you can turn it off or pause the video or silence it from there. But theirs doesn't have any buttons. But if you scroll back up, this is for if you find yourself caught at newsweek.com, which I doubt it's going to happen very often. Scroll back up to the top and the full embedded window with all the controls like shut up, stop, rewind, silence, full screen, if you should want to do that, is all available to you. Okay, so Newsweek. I think they initially reported this much earlier than June, but that's the date line up here, June 9th, 7 a.m. My recollection was, what did they say here in the story we were just reading? I thought that they said that Newsweek initially reported it in January. But, oh no, there it is. Obtained in Newsweek by Newsweek in June. So June it is. I do see that there's an update here anyway. So Jeff Stein at Newsweek's piece is titled, Michael Flynn, Russia and a Grand Scheme to Build Nuclear Power Plants in Saudi Arabia and the Arab World. I mean, there's a tip-off that that's a bad idea for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is I am still puzzled as to why the Arab world felt that anybody would think, even for a minute, yeah, what they need are nuclear power plants. And my guess here is that a lot of these, particularly the very wealthy states, and maybe some of the less wealthy states, but the ones who are really in the thick of the Middle Eastern swirl, like Egypt, which got mentioned in here. But like Saudi Arabia sort of sits on the periphery and has lots and lots of money. And they sort of seem like the kind of folks who would say, let's develop not only nuclear power, but more to the point, nuclear weapons. Because why not? What does it take to develop nuclear weapons but money? And we have plenty of money. But what we need, that will worry everybody. We aren't going to get the world's permission to develop nuclear weapons. But, we've seen this playbook work. We know how to get to that point. You start out by saying we want peaceful nuclear power, and then you have scientists secretly working on converting that into bomb-making material elsewhere. And then you hire the bomb-making technicians and scientists that you need. And there's plenty to go around in the if you want to do your shopping in the Islamic world, of course, because Pakistan can provide that information and might just be willing to do so. And perhaps in exchange for continued Saudi funding of more educational institutions in Pakistan, like the Wahhabist madrasas that cause such problems, apparently, in the minds of foreign policy circles here in the United States. But let's not wander too far afield, and we'll read the Newsweek piece here, updated as it is. It says right here, by the time Michael Flynn was fired as President Donald Trump's national security advisor in February, he had made a lot of bad decisions. One was taking money from the Russians and failing to disclose it. Another was taking money under the table from the Turks. But an overlooked line in his financial disclosure form, which he was forced to amend to detail those foreign payments, reveals he was also involved in one of the most audacious and some say harebrained schemes in recent memory. I say harebrained. I just did, but I mean it about this particular plan. And you'll see why. It's a plan to build scores of U.S. nuclear power plants in the Middle East as a safety measure. This is really far-fetched. In 2015 and 2016, according to this filing, Flynn was an advisor to Exco Dynamics Incorporated / Iron Bridge Group, which at first glance looks like just another Pentagon consultancy that ex-military officers use to fatten their wallets. Wallets deserve to be fattened at some point. The military guys don't get nearly enough money for what they handle. But then, of course, so much of what they want in life is taken care of. For instance, socialized medicine, right? Anyway, never mind that. I don't know. Maybe we underpay these guys, but okay, they can fatten their wallets. I'm not even that worried about that. Its chairman and CEO was retired Admiral Michael Hewitt. Another retired admiral, Frank Skip Bowman, who oversaw the Navy's nuclear programs. I think about 30% of Pentagon or Navy brass ends up getting nicknamed Skip, right? I mean, they captain boats. Anyway, Frank Skip Bowman oversaw the Navy's nuclear programs. He was an advisor. Other top guns associated with it were former National Security Agency Keith Alexander. I reversed the last syllables there. Boss Keith Alexander and retired Marine Corps General James Hoss Cartwright. He's the guy who was ahead of Jerry Seinfeld in the Chinese restaurant. You remember him. A former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff whose stellar career was marred when he was prosecuted last year for lying to the FBI during a leak investigation. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. And I believe somewhere, okay. That's the sound we like to play every time vice chairs of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are caught lying to the FBI during leak investigations. In June of 2015, knowledgeable sources, if there are any left, they were the ones who must have told Newsweek that Flynn flew to Egypt and Israel on behalf of Exco/Iron Bridge. And Israel doesn't at any point say, what is the plan here? You're going to sell nuclear power plants where? To who? That's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that. Although somehow I guess they maybe convinced the Israelis that it was a good idea. There was a very complicated scheme here. We did discuss it a little bit yesterday. So he flies to Egypt and Israel on behalf of this group. His mission, to gauge attitudes in Cairo and Jerusalem, not on the street, but in closed doors, toward a plan. The Arab street was left out of this one. That's the problem. To gauge attitudes in Cairo and Jerusalem toward a plan for a joint U.S.-Russian, back to Russia again, and Saudi-financed program to get control over the Arab world's rush to acquire nuclear power. What was their rush to acquire nuclear power? There's a link here to worldnuclear.org, I guess with country profiles, emerging nuclear energy countries. And I guess they're all over the Middle East. Maybe I'll take a look. What if they're not? And they just came up with this stupid scheme based on nothing. That's entirely possible. What do we have here? In the Middle East and North Africa, Gulf states including UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait, Yemen, Israel. Ooh, imagine a nuclear Yemen. How's that for a mess? Yemen, Israel, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, and Sudan. That's quite a bit. Sudan? Whew. Okay, well those are listed as emerging nuclear countries. They might as well be companies in this report. Just checking. I feel like I have to. Like if they didn't even name any of these countries in the Middle East, and then they were like, well, we'll just sell you these nuclear power plants because you're trying to get them anyway, and they're not trying to get them. Seems like an important thing to know. But they are, allegedly, according to this one link. At the core of their concern, this group apparently, was a fear that states in the volatile Middle East would have inadequate security for the plants and safeguards for their radioactive waste, the stuff of nuclear bombs. Those are good concerns. They are valid concerns. There would have been inadequate security for the plants and safeguards for their radioactive waste. So something needs to be done. Interestingly, the answer here is let's give that to them. Let's give them the plants. And then, of course, we'll give them the adequate security for those plants and safeguards for their radioactive waste. How do we know they're adequate? Because we're being paid to provide them. That's how we know it's adequate. How do we really know? Only the test of time will show whether or not they were adequate, but I'd rather not just even test it at all. Let's not do it. Anyway, but no less a concern for Flynn and his partners was the moribund U.S. nuclear industry. There's the problem, which was losing out to Russian and even South Korean contractors in the region. In other words, yes, they can't be trusted with these things, but they're going to build them anyway. They've got the money, and someone will take the money. And in this case, Russia and even South Korea will take the money and build them plants of undetermined levels of safety with undetermined levels of security being provided for the plants and for the nuclear waste afterwards. Instead, we'd like to take over that and do it securely. And that's not even the worst idea necessarily. I mean, when you step back and consider what's really going on here and where we're putting nuclear power plants, and wait till you hear the full details of these. I'm going to tease this again, but there's lots of concern. But I guess if it worked perfectly, well, America will provide the security, and America will help them deal with the nuclear waste and make sure that none of these materials from start to finish fall into terrorist hands. But America won't really be doing it because that's expensive, and also it doesn't benefit any of us. Americans, as in American companies, will be doing this, and so therefore we can split up the money among us. If we do it as a country, it's just a loss leader for us. It's just money we spend out of the Treasury to station troops there, and they don't even like it or appreciate it. So instead, we'll allow them to hire us as mercenaries and funnel the money out of the public sector into the private sector and keep it for ourselves. And there'll be lots of it because Saudis are involved, Russians are involved, and the military is involved. And no one knows how much the military costs, so we can bill $1 million a minute if we want to. And the Saudis and the Russians are rich, so they'll give it to us. Now, the Russian government isn't rich. The Saudi government / royal family is rich. Russian oligarchs are rich, and as long as they net additional funds, they're making money, they don't mind spending money elsewhere. So, the big concern here, apparently, the big driver is the U.S. nuclear industry, which hasn't been able to build a new plant in how long? Because no one wants them, and they're not particularly safe, I guess. So they're becoming a moribund industry. But the Russians and South Koreans don't care about safety, especially if those things are being built elsewhere. So what the hell? So they're raking in all kinds of money, building maybe decent nuclear power plants, maybe not. In the case of the Russians, I would say that it's very likely that they might not even care whether their plants are safe. One, because they're elsewhere, and two, because it's mobbed up. And, one way the mob loves to make money is to do a subpar job that's a lot cheaper and charge the full freight for a good job. And we built your nuclear power plant's core out of styrofoam, but it looks like cement. So are you happy with that? If you're not, come see if you can get your money back from the Russian mob. The South Koreans, I don't know, maybe they're mobbed up too. Or maybe the Russians aren't. I'm assuming too much. I'm very anti-Russian today. Shame on me. So the main concern appeared to be, the U.S. nuclear power plant building industry is losing money to these guys. Let's embark on a Marshall Plan to save my friends who work in the nuclear power plant construction industry. That's essentially what this was. Or as Stuart Solomon, a top executive along with Hewitt and his new venture IP3, put it in a recent speech to industry executives, we find ourselves standing on the sidelines and watching the competition pass us by. That's what's driving it. So, that the oil-rich, sun-soaked Arab Middle East would pursue nuclear energy seems paradoxical. It does. But as The Economist noted in 2015, if it's in The Economist, let's see what they have to say. Demand for electricity is rising, along with pressure to lower carbon emissions. True. Nuclear plants tick both boxes. And some of the region's major players, like Egypt and Jordan, don't have oil and gas resources and want nuclear power to shore up the security of their energy supplies, The Economist said, skipping entirely over solar, but whatever. So the genius idea the Americans advocated was a U.S.-Russian partnership to build and operate plants and export the dangerous spent fuel under strict controls. So strict that private companies would be doing it and doing it in foreign countries. And so the controls would really be zero. But the thing is, we say they're strict. And we personally really feel like they would be. That's it. Flynn's role would be helping Exco/Ironbridge design and implement a vast security network for the entire enterprise, according to an internal memo by ACU Strategic Partners, one of the lead companies involved, and obtained by Newsweek. Not only would the project revive a U.S. nuclear industry, but it would cost American taxpayers nothing, like the Iraq War. That's what its principles asserted. It would be funded entirely by Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, according to the ACU memo. The cost for the kingdom? Close to $1 trillion. That's real money, says a project insider who asked for anonymity in exchange for discussing internal matters. Theoretically, the Saudis and other participating Mideast governments would recoup some of the costs by selling energy through their utilities, according to the ACU plan. That's a slow way to make up $1 trillion. But if the Saudis and other Arab states buy in, it won't be for energy, says Thomas Cochrane, a prominent scientist and nuclear non-proliferation proponent involved with the ACU project. They are buying security, he tells Newsweek. Under the ACU plan, they're buying a security arrangement involving the U.S., Russia, France, and the UK eventually. A surprise, UK, you're in on this too. Did you know that? Yes. Why are they buying security? Because, we'll build the nuclear power plants, sure, but we really give you also our proprietary security package. And that's, I think, where Eric Prince comes into the whole thing. We haven't really called his name out yet, but he happens to be in the private security business. Left out of this grand nuclear scheme, Iran. Along with Syria, its war-ravaged Shiite proxy. In fact, it was always a part of the project that Russia's involvement would tilt Russia away from Iran. Fred Johnson, ACU's chief economist, wrote in an email to his advisors obtained by Newsweek. The idea was that Russia, facing what Johnson called an economic and existential calamity because of low oil prices, could use the income generated from this partnership. The consortium could then purchase Russian military hardware to compensate Moscow for losing military sales to Iran. Interesting, to say the least. And remember what we learned yesterday about the Seychelles meeting between the Crown Prince of the UAE and Eric Prince of the USA. And their discussions, well, Eric Prince would only tell us it was really about business. He wasn't there as a Trump proxy. But remember, we learned that the UAE's interest in all of this was trying to find a way to separate Russia and get it to step back in its support of Iran and and reduce its interference in Syria. And hey, this crazy plan, coincidentally happens to have, as part of its motivation, the exact same thing. So the likelihood that the two things are connected, obviously near zero, right? Why else would, actually it seems like there's a pretty good chance that they are connected. And I like the scheme too, right? Russia, you won't lose out on any money. We'll buy Russian military hardware to do what with? To arm our mercenaries with, who are supposed to be guarding these nuclear power plants. It's a win-win, win-win-win. Further plans to sideline Iran, Johnson wrote, this article continues, included the development of XCO, the Hewitt company that Flynn was advising, with its very visible deployment of Sea Launch, a Russian company that would provide a platform for rockets to put surveillance satellites in orbit. Surveillance satellites to watch the nuclear power plants, you see. This is a very vertically integrated operation. Flynn was, quote, not involved in the negotiations with Sea Launch, Cochran says. The former general, now being pursued by federal investigators probing contacts between Russian officials and Trump's inner circle, did not respond to an inquiry from Newsweek. People associated with the Middle East project said they thought Flynn's involvement was limited to sounding out the Egyptians and Israelis on security aspects of the enterprise. He listed no income from XCO/Iron Bridge on his financial disclosure form. To the best of my knowledge, Flynn was not being paid for his expertise, as was the case with many advisors to the project, Cochran says, but the former general's travel expenses were picked up by ACU, as were his own. Now, the cost of business-class round-trip airfare and exclusive hotels for the trip would have ranged between $10,000 and $15,000. That does not explain the $25,000 payment. Not by itself, anyway. Hewitt denied that isolating Iran was part of the plan. Why? Why would you want to deny that? XCO wasn't created to simply sideline Iran. Oh, not simply to do so. Okay. He responded to Johnson and their associates in an email. It was designed to set the conditions for stability, which were the precursors to building 40 plants. 40? Oy. And to solidify the Gulf Cooperation Council, Jordan, Egypt, and others, under a security construct led by two superpowers using state-of-the-art capability. But the project faced opposition from the Obama administration. Oh, no wonder Flynn's so anti-Obama. They didn't want to do it with the Russians and didn't want to do it while they were negotiating the Iran nuclear deal, he tells Newsweek. You can see why. If you're trying to negotiate with Iran and say you can't become a nuclear power, you don't also want to be saying it will become our financial interest to make these other countries nuclear powers. Trump's embrace of Russian President Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, offered an attractive possibility. And when Flynn, who had connections to the Russians, became the candidate's national security advisor, the ACU team, led by British-American dealmaker Alex Copson, a new name in our rogues gallery, suddenly seemed to have an inside man. Last year, Copson was touting such connections when he tried to persuade the Tennessee Valley Authority to transfer an unfinished Alabama nuclear plant to the ACU in exchange for shares in the consortium that would build reactors in the Middle East, telling a Huntsville reporter that Alabama's 2 senators, both Republicans, and one, Jeff Sessions, then a top Trump campaign advisor, can help in the next administration move this project forward. The plant was eventually sold, though, to another company. You see how audacious this really is? Tennessee Valley Authority should sell these unfinished nuclear plants to us, who are going to build a nuclear power plant consortium with Russia and Saudi Arabia. Wait a minute. Are you kidding me? Of course the administration was opposed to this. It's ridiculous. That's the harebrained aspect of the harebrained scheme. There's more, still more to come, which will bring you after this second break for station identification. I wish there were commercials. There aren't. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Thanks for waiting with us through that second break, and looks like everything's still working well here, so let's forge ahead with this. This really is kind of interesting. They really do a lot of scheming. They spend a lot of energy on this, and they come up with some really, I guess, almost plausible schemes. Thank God they didn't get away with most of this stuff. Jeff Sessions now pulled into this one. When reports surfaced that the FBI was investigating possible collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign, however, some of Copson's partners, remember Alex Copson, the British-American dealmaker behind the ACU team, the guy who wanted the Tennessee Valley Authority to sell him an unfinished nuclear power plant in Alabama, when Copson and his partners and advisors decided at that point that it was time to walk away. That actually is very smart. When Copson decided he was going to saddle up with the Trump team, that was the last straw for me. Oh, I see. An insider says, I said it's time to regroup. So let me see if we can look at that again. Some of Copson's partners and advisors got worried about the Trump situation. Copson thought it was a good idea. The Saudis hadn't shown much interest anyway, the insider says. Copson was promising the advisors lots of money if the Saudis put up money, but it failed to materialize because, of course, they bought missiles instead. Remember the great big gigantic deal that Jared Kushner brokered that was really already done, and they doubled the amount of because it sounded more interesting if they said it was worth more, and it really isn't worth anything because it's just an agreement to agree later, et cetera, et cetera. Jared Kushner took all the money. Sorry, guys. You should get on that, though. You should be angry with him. The Saudis hadn't shown much interest anyway, because why do they want nuclear power plants? Copson was promising that they would be interested, but I guess they weren't. And so there's nothing that anyone was going to gain unless the project was a success. Well, that seems obvious. Hewitt and his associates also split from ACU to pursue their own path toward a nuclear-powered Middle East. We will not give up on the dream. One that would swap in China for Russia as a nuclear partner, because they're a lot more trustworthy. Well, I guess a little bit. I don't know. They're not mobbed in the same way that Russia is, although I guess you could make the argument that we just don't understand their system as well as we should, and if we did, we'd think of it more like mob rule than anything else. It's just they're more respectable because they are actually in government, although increasingly in Russia, that seems to be the case as well. So that can't really be the distinction. Anyway, the geniuses who wouldn't do business with the Trump guys decided that it was still a good business idea, just switch out China for Russia. Hewitt declined to discuss plans for IP3, telling Newsweek he was, quote, working hard to create our own public persona right now. Okay. Whatever that's supposed to mean. But the highly regarded Cochran stayed with ACU, a longtime senior scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council, where he was director of its nuclear program. Really? Cochrane was the author of countless studies and articles over the decades and had initiated with Moscow the U.S.-Soviet nuclear test ban verification project in 1986. He has extraordinary chutzpah, a writer for Scientific American observed in 1998. He's willing to take on what most people wouldn't bother with because they assume it's hopeless. I don't know if he's all... I can't tell whether he's remained dedicated to virtuous principles and we just can't see exactly what vision he sees, or whether he's become hopelessly corrupt and doesn't know it. But I guess that's hinted at in this next paragraph, right? He's highly regarded, longtime senior scientist at the NRDC, which is thought of as a rather liberal-leaning organization, director of the nuclear program, author of countless studies and articles over the decades, Soviet nuclear test ban verification, that's a good thing, right? Has extraordinary chutzpah because he's willing to take on what other people wouldn't bother us because they assume it's hopeless. Or nuts. The article continues. In 2001, a writer for the left wing in These Times Weekly got hold of a draft proposal for the 1990s era project that Cochrane was involved in, the Non-Proliferation Trust, NPT, which envisioned taking control of spent fuel from reactors around the world and shipping it to Russia on large ships mounted with an arsenal of weapons designed to ward off nuclear pirates, wrote Jeffrey St. Clair. The big question is, what happens to the waste after it arrives in Russia? That is a big question. Why did you want to send it there? Most observers, including Cochrane, believe countries developing nuclear power should be responsible for disposing of their own spent nuclear fuel. What St. Clair failed to appreciate, he says, is the difficulty of doing so for many countries, either because of geology, like Taiwan in the earthquake-prone Pacific, costs, like Mexico, or a weak security environment as in the Middle East, where the buildup of spent fuel represents a significant proliferation risk. Had the NPT project not failed, Cochrane says, we probably would have a spent fuel repository underway in Russia and now under strict oversight instead of a looming crisis. Or we would have a bunch of oligarchic international mobster criminals with their own nuclear arsenal independent of Russia's. But, you know, six of one, half dozen the other, I guess. As for the dangers of shipping spent fuel across the oceans, Cochrane says it's been done safely for decades. All the more reason to partner with the Russians today in an ironclad security arrangement, Hewitt says. We're always going to be engaged in the security of the Middle East, he told a May gathering at the Nuclear Energy Institute. It is in our best interest to ensure that nuclear power is introduced with all of the safety standards of the U.S. And what better way to do that than involve Russian mobsters in it, because mobsters love safety standards. Cochrane urges critics not to lose focus on the big picture, which he alternately likens to launching the U.S. Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe after World War II, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, another fantastic inspiration, which tamed rivers and brought electricity and industrial development to the American South in the 1930s. Remember how good the TVA is and how important it was to tame rivers and bring industrial and electricity and industrial development through gigantic dams throughout the region. Remember that, just for a second. It would provide energy and jobs and so forth for countries like Egypt and others in the region, and that would be a good thing. Jobs is great. So that these young men have got something more useful to do than go out and shoot each other or us, right? For a project fraught with such diplomatic and logistical minefields, however, Copson is perhaps an odd choice to lead ACU into the Middle East, widely reported to be a sometime bass player with the British rock band Iron Butterfly, though not an official member. Why can't we just have a normal diplomatic corps? It's not our country thing, but I mean, these eccentrics. What do? Well, I sometimes come up with international plans for nuclear non-proliferation through proliferation, and other times I unofficially play bass for Iron Butterfly. But whatever. Copson, of course, we have to have some censorship materials in here as well. It says, Copson once famously described the natives of the Marshall Islands. What? Poor Marshall Islands. As, well, fat, lazy Fs, like the F words. Fat, lazy Fs. Why? Because they nixed one of his nuke dump schemes in the Central Pacific Ocean. Muckraking journalist Greg Palast wrote in 2001. The islands, by the way, it helpfully notes for us, are now disappearing under rising seas. That true? Is he saying that the idea was he was going to make one of his nuclear fuel dumps on the Marshall Islands? Because that is a terrible idea. Those things are about 2 inches above sea level, and as they note here, now disappearing under rising seas. Huge problem. If you wanted to keep that stuff out of the water, and I assume you do, although maybe that was the plan. Like maybe they really wanted to dump nuclear fuel in the middle of the Central Pacific Ocean, and the Marshall Islands people were upset because that would kill all the fish or mutate all the fish near them and eventually wash up on their shores. Or did he want to actually bury it on the Marshall Islands, which is nearly pointless because you're practically in the ocean already anyway? I don't know. So he's very angry that they would. Why those fat, lazy Fs won't let me dump nuclear fuel on them? I wouldn't either, and I exercise regularly. Copson did not respond to several calls, emails, and written questions asking for comment, but that's because he was playing with Iron Butterfly. But it's not unlikely the Trump team, many of whom are under close scrutiny for their undisclosed Russian contacts, will be any help to Copson now. And the Saudis aren't taking the kind of steps that would be required to really get serious about setting up a civil nuclear energy infrastructure, says Tristan Volpe, a fellow in the nuclear policy program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. Others suspect the Saudis are up to something more nefarious because of the U.S.-led nuclear deal with Iran. The Saudis have big ambitions for nuclear, said David Albright, president of the Institute for Science and International Security in Washington, D.C. The issue is whether they cross over into any processing or enrichment with secret partners like Pakistan or China. Flynn once expressed deep worries about a Saudi-Iranian nuclear arms race. In a January 2016 interview with Al Jazeera, he sounded like Cochrane, the elder statesman of the non-proliferation movement. An entirely new economy is what this region needs, he said. I'll just give it to them. I'll sell it to them, especially for the millions of unemployed young men living under corrupt autocracies and tempted by extremism. He's talking about Saudi Arabia, not the United States. You've got to give them something else to do. If you don't, they're going to wear MAGA hats and march in alt-right gatherings. Or rather, it says here, they're going to turn on their own governments, which when it happens here, it's not turning on their own government. It's support for their government. Over there, it's turning on their own government because that worries us here in America. They're all going to turn on their own government anyway because their government is a ludicrous, antiquated model that can't possibly be sustainable. But okay. That was before he hitched up with Trump, though, who has embraced the Saudi monarchy and ratcheted up his rhetoric against Iran. Talk of a grand scheme to create jobs in the Middle East, meanwhile, has evaporated, with the Russia scandal enveloping not only Flynn, but Trump's entire presidency. Now, here's a correction down at the bottom of the piece here. A previous version of this story failed to adequately explain the potential security benefits of the ACU plan to bring nuclear power plants to the Middle East via a proposed consortium of the U.S., Russia, France, and potentially the U.K. in an arrangement that would also control the disposition of spent fuel under strict international supervision. Newsweek has afforded nuclear scientist Thomas Cochrane, an advisor to the ACU group, more space to explain the plan's potential benefits. In addition, an earlier effort Cochrane was involved in was called the Non-Proliferation Trust, not the Nuclear Proliferation Trust. That would be a bad mistake. Cochrane also clarified that he only believes that Michael Flynn was compensated for his travel expenses as an unpaid advisor but cannot be certain. The earlier version of the story said it was unclear whether Flynn was involved in negotiations to bring sea launch into the project. It has been changed to include Cochrane's statement that Flynn was not involved in that arrangement. Okay, so we read the correct version of it, obviously, but interesting to know the history of those two tidbits. So Yesterday we read the proposal paper from ACU Strategic Partners, and we got through, let's see, the overview of the project that told us the basic structure of it. We got through, did we get all the way down through implementation? Phase 1 of the project, IPG will form new partnerships among the U.S. and participating Mideast countries. Yes. Okay. But I don't know if we got to, oh no, we may not have gotten to this part because I think this was the part that really made things just a little crazier than they already were. Immediately after the show yesterday, I tweeted out just how harebrained I thought this whole scheme was. In addition to all of this nutsiness, we're going to build 40 nuclear power plants across the Middle East where they don't need them, don't really even want them, and it will create a huge security risk. But don't worry, we'll sell you security in addition to all this. And by the way, what would make the less than stable, less than gainfully employed masses of young men in the Middle East happier than to see the giant nuclear power plants being raised up? Everyone loves to see the profile of a nuclear power plant going up in their neighborhood, and they know what those are. Those plants would be going up. And by the way, the idea that they would employ the already under or unemployed local masses to build these things, why would they do that? I mean, there's plenty of construction going on throughout the Middle East, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc., and it's all being done with imported labor that can be paid near or actual slave wages. Slave wages, of course, being zero. And sometimes that's exactly what they're being paid. You know, they bring in workers, they promise them the world, they confiscate their passports, and then they're basically stuck there and they work under slave-like conditions to do all this construction. And what could make things better than, one, for more of that to be going on, so that none of the great paying jobs, which don't exist, because why would the Saudis, if they have to pay this American company all this money to get this project that they don't even want started, why are they going to pay the laborers to build the thing? And what's better for anybody than unskilled, unpaid, forced labor that feels duped being given the responsibility for safely constructing a nuclear power plant? So, okay, well, we won't do that. American contractors, under strict standards, will build these nuclear power plants instead, unless Russians do it, and they might be mobsters, but whatever. Okay, so now there's zero jobs for any of you here locally, and what do you see going up? Not another new office building, which, while annoying, is harmless, relatively speaking, but in fact the profile of a nuclear power plant, which is internationally recognized as, hey, maybe this will kill us. What could be better than doing that? Well, how about if we add a couple thousand Blackwater guards in Oakley sunglasses who feel like they have impunity for shooting us down in the middle of the street for sport? That won't radicalize anybody. This is a terrible idea. But it gets worse. Phase 1 of the project, okay, IPG forms these new partnerships. You'll just go out and form them, because everybody wants to be a partners in this. How are you going to form a new partnership with the U.S. and participating Mideast countries when Mideast countries don't want this product in the first place? I don't know, but we will. And then we'll build state-of-the-art enrichment and fuel fabrication facilities. Wait a minute. Enrichment and fuel fabrication facilities? Wait a minute. We don't want that in the Middle East. Those are exactly the places that would be targeted. Well, don't worry. We'll build them in the United States. Well, wait a minute. We don't want them here either, really. One, because they will be targeted. But two, we stopped building that kind of stuff a long time ago. It's dangerous. But we have to do it in order to supply them with the Uber, but for nuclear power, proprietary fuel packets that they can't tamper with and extract fuel from, so that we can bring in the fuel and bring out the spent fuel safely, and terrorists won't have any reason to target it to steal it for their own bomb-making purposes. Okay, let's assume that's a good idea. Where are you going to put them? How about if we put them in the most horrific strategic locations imaginable without actually building them inside New York City, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, California? Where do you want to put them? One will be in Tennessee. near Oak Ridge, where nothing's going on in particular, right? Oak Ridge. Hardly anything happens in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Well, of course, you'll probably recognize Oak Ridge. Isn't that one of our big nuclear research facilities? And isn't that the place where one of a few places? Am I wrong about this? I have not researched, but isn't it as between Los Alamos and Oak Ridge? Is that not where we build the materials for our own nuclear weapons right now? I mean, why would a terrorist be interested in something like that? And by the way, I should skip down a little bit here, but it seems like the idea here is to build these things on behalf of our Middle Eastern partners. In other words, you Saudis will own and control these installations. What are they? They are installations that, I think, if you decide, say a terrorist decides to intentionally make things go very, very wrong, you would be blowing things up, possibly with fissionable materials, right in the middle of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where I can't really think of any reason why international terrorists and enemies of the United States would want to detonate a large weapon where we manufacture our own nuclear weapons, which are the crux of our ability to keep a boot on the necks of the rest of the world. Anybody? I can't really think of a good reason why they would target that. But okay, maybe that's not the worst place you could put it. Although I did ask you to remember that in Tennessee and the importance of the Tennessee Valley Authority, and I guess it probably wouldn't matter very much to have a nuclear detonation in the middle of all those fantastic dams that tame the rivers and produce electricity, right? That wouldn't be a problematic situation, would it? Well, okay. Could it be worse? And again, remember, the ground rules of the game are you can't also build it in New York and Los Angeles. Where else might you put it? How about Hampton Roads, Virginia? How about in the middle of the United States' largest naval base, where some 75 plus major battle vessels of various sizes and shapes, destroyers, battleships, cruise missile launchers, aircraft carriers, gigantic entire strike groups entire fleets based in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and Virginia Beach area. The chief method of projection of American power into the Middle East, Persian Gulf, and elsewhere, of course, and all around the world. Why would you not want a big, dirty bomb to be built in the middle of that, right? Not a terrorist target at all. I mean, I guess there's plenty of security around it, but this is starting to sound worse and worse, isn't it? ACU, it says, has entered into a critical partnership with Mammoet, M-A-M-M-O-E-T, also not a good connotation to that, the premier Dutch logistics and nuclear construction firm, to advise on the construction of these plants, transport their output and nuclear fuel and reactor components to the Middle East, and help oversee the planning for building 40 reactors in the region. Now, I thought the idea was to help the moribund U.S. nuclear industry, but apparently it's now going to help the, I don't know whether it's moribund or not, Dutch nuclear industry. So a little bit of a shift there, a little bit of a bait and switch. Both U.S. facilities are being designed by CH2M Hill, a leading U.S. engineering firm. That's true. By building the two U.S. plants, the IPG project will bind the United States and participating Middle East nations together, both economically, with up to $200 billion in U.S. nuclear export opportunities over the life of the project, and in a new expanded security relationship. In Phase 2, the output of the secure enrichment and fuel fabrication facility, as well as the heavy nuclear component manufacturing plant, will be dedicated to serving only the IPG-owned Middle East reactors. Spare enrichment and manufacturing capacity will be made available to the U.S. Navy. IPG, the project company, will be paid directly by the Saudi and other host country governments at a pre-negotiated price to provide both the power plants and a robust, comprehensive security package for the plants, as well as the associated infrastructure. So the benefit of putting this nuclear reactor in the middle of the biggest Navy yard in the world is that they can maybe sell whatever energy is left over to the Navy. But in the meantime, we will be bearing all the risks of these nuclear reactors sitting in these very vulnerable spots for the benefit exclusively of other countries. It's like the Keystone XL pipeline of nuclear power, essentially. We're going to build all of this infrastructure and pipe all the energy out. But if there's anything left, the Navy gets it. That's nice. The participating Mideast governments will be able to sell electricity from their plants in their respective countries through their utilities, but the key value of the project is the mutual assurance of security and prosperity resulting from the IPG architecture and broad economic benefits of the project rather than profits from the sale of electricity. In other words, the plan is we are going to give you comprehensive security for this item that you don't want. You buy it from us, and it makes you a terrorist target, but you can sell some electricity. And, better yet, we'll take away the worry of being targeted by terrorists by selling you an even more expensive, comprehensive security package for this product you didn't need in the first place. Sound good? Yes, tell me more. How else can I waste my money? By providing all the nuclear fuel necessary, including a fuel bank to ensure timely delivery, like Uber, the IPG project removes any incentive at all for Middle East partner countries to build their own enrichment capability in the region. It also eliminates the need for spent fuel storage and geologic disposal by the Mideast by removing the spent fuel to an appropriate approved country outside the Middle East, like maybe us. The U.S., they say, currently has no capability to take spent fuel, so we're out. So we're going to dump our garbage that we sold to these guys elsewhere. There's a little bit more, but I think probably not all that valuable to comb through. But some of the key points, let's see. Middle East countries underwrite and operate Mideast regional security. IPG, and there's a little detail for each of these bullet points, but I'll give you the bullet points so we can exit from this piece here. IPG provides mutually assured security with state-of-the-art technologies in close coordination with governments. A Middle East Marshall Plan, this is how they describe the thing, really a terrible misuse of the name. 2 major plants jointly owned with Gulf state partners to be built in the U.S. for manufacturing this garbage, both in, like I said, Virginia and Tennessee. Bad idea. ACU IPG project can fix the 4 non-secure South Korean nuclear reactors under construction in the UAE. What do you know? The UAE. Let's read a little bit about that one. The Korea UAE nuclear project does not provide a secure in and out nuclear fuel cycle and therefore presents a strategic risk for release of potentially weaponizable material, a risk that the ACU IPG project would address while preventing similar risks from other Mideast nuclear projects. So the UAE has this particular problem, it seems. And lastly, Israeli security. Because both the fuel cycle and the reactors will be secure, including the removal of spent fuel for safekeeping outside of the region, nowhere do we find out where it goes, the project will eliminate potentially significant threats to Israel's security from current Middle East nuclear power developments. Don't worry about it, guys. The project will strengthen Israel's energy security by providing Israel with the energy output of 2 reactors that are located in either Egypt or Jordan. So we're going to build, in addition to in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, we're going to build some of these reactors, maybe in Egypt, maybe in Jordan, and they'll totally sell you the electricity because that's the way things work. And wouldn't Israel love the opportunity to become energy dependent on Jordan and Egypt? I'm sure that they would be. They are at peace, technically speaking, but I'll bet they'd rather not become energy dependent on those 2 particular neighbors. But what do I know about Israeli politics, right? I mean, after all, I still think it was a bad idea for the prime minister's son to put racist, anti-Semitic cartoons on his Facebook page when clearly it was to their political advantage to do so. We're going to take our last station identification break right after this, and then we'll be back. Maybe we can switch subjects. I believe we've beaten this one just about to death. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Back for our final segment of the day, bringing down the music. How was our station identification? Did everybody get their stations identified properly? Well, okay. Time for us now to shift gears as we are sending you off for the weekend. And we've made you awfully smart, I think, about the insanity of this particular deal to locate very dangerous nuclear reactors that are huge terrorist targets. We are only building them here because we know they're huge terrorist targets. We want to bring them where it's nice and safe, like in the middle of the Tennessee Valley, I guess. I don't know. Maybe Oak Ridge is in the middle of the Tennessee Valley. I may have the geography of Tennessee backwards, but anywhere in Tennessee would be a bad place to detonate a giant, dirty bomb, I would think. And particularly in the middle of our own nuclear facilities and research labs. And, of course, in Hampton Roads, Virginia would be another terrible place to do that. But the good thing is there would be lots of money for Eric Prince in this, and he's really lacking in funds. By the way, where does he live again? Is it in the UAE? Yeah, I think it is. That's weird. Anyway, I'm sure it's all coincidence, and they absolutely weren't coordinating any sort of international intrigue in bringing him into this stupid scheme from Michael Flynn, the spy. Okay, I mentioned to you earlier that Ivanka Trump is extraordinarily ridiculous, and you already knew this to be the case. She's been all over the news in the last couple of days because, I don't know, she decided for whatever reason to give somebody an interview in which she said that it was unrealistic to expect her to be able to influence her father, the President of the United States. And, of course, the world reacted as expected. How stupid is it for a senior White House advisor to say it's unrealistic to expect me to be able to influence the president? That's only my job. But because, of course, she's the president's daughter, and because she spends apparently most of her time as White House advisor either dropping in unexpectedly on visiting dignitaries from our own government and from abroad just to say hi, because why not, and going on vacation. So, I don't know. It's very disturbing to see her saying things like this. I guess it first got reported, or it first reached me anyway, here in the Daily Beast. Ivanka Trump, senior advisor, she says it's unrealistic to expect her to advise and influence the president's decisions. I guess she gave the interview to the original interview to the Financial Times. I mean, it's just pretty incredible. Some people have created unrealistic expectations of what they expect from me. Ivanka Trump, who is also the president's daughter, said in a new interview with the Financial Times that my presence in and of itself would carry so much weight with my father that he would abandon his core values and the agenda that the American people voted for when they elected him. It's not going to happen. To those critics, shy of turning my father into a liberal, I'd be a failure to them. Now, of course, you would be a failure to us anyway. But okay. Additionally, she said, being the voice of dissent would mean I'm not part of the team. Ivanka explained that she organized several weeks of meetings to convince her father not to abandon the Paris Climate Accord, but to no avail. The younger Trump instead said she should be judged by her accomplishments in the policy areas designated to her, such as gender equality in the workplace, which she entirely surrendered the other day. But never mind. But, I mean, it is really an extraordinary statement, and I wanted to highlight it again, not only because it's stupid for a White House advisor to say that they have no influence, but it's stupid for her to be a White House advisor in the first place. We know why you're a White House advisor. That's because you couldn't get the secure phone to text back and forth with your dad without being a government official, and you thought it would be fun to go on all these trips, and it was easier to justify all traveling with your dad if you were a White House advisor. But what are you advising him on? Nothing. And I guess what I really thought was amazing about this was just the waste of the opportunity. You have, or at least had up until very recently, I guess John Kelly has restricted things somewhat, but you had what was available, not even 1 in 10,000 lifetimes opportunity. Once in a lifetime opportunity? No. 1 in 10,000 lifetimes, perhaps. Walk-in privileges to the Oval Office, the center of the decision-making universe for the entire world, basically, leader of the free world's personal office, and you could walk in there at any time. For you to shrug your shoulders at that, meh, what can I do with this? I can't wear it. What can I do with it? Right? I don't know what to do with the ability to walk in at any moment and have a personal, long-standing, familial relationship with the President of the United States, and I still can't do anything with it, is an astonishing admission. Except that I'm not astonished because I knew you were an idiot from the get-go. And what's the point, even if you were a genius, of advising an idiot? None. That's all frustrating in itself. But just the idea, the waste of an opportunity like this. One, because the president is an empty-headed clown and nothing can be done with him. And two, because you're incapable of doing anything with him anyway, is amazing to me. And to shrug your shoulders at that and to think about how many people would love to be in that position. Maybe not for this president, that's true. But think of the thousands, millions perhaps, of Americans who would give anything for the opportunity to have the ear of the President of the United States, and that you stepped in line, by the way, cut in line, and stole their jobs like some kind of a Mexican, as your father would probably say, is pretty irritating by itself. But okay, maybe you can have an unlimited number of White House advisors, even senior White House advisors. The point is to meh and shoulder shrug at, what could I do, at one of the most amazing opportunities in the world is really about as big a comment on your privilege as I can imagine. Who else but an heiress from birth would meh that opportunity? What can I do? I might as well go on vacation. What can I do? I'll bring my daughter in and give the President of the United States the opportunity to say, everybody, look, my granddaughter is here. She's so wonderful, ladies and gentlemen. Most beautiful granddaughter ever. Let's all cuddle her. That's nice and all that, but it doesn't do anything. Imagine being handed the chance to counsel the President of the United States and saying, oh, well, instead. That's such a statement on our privilege, I can't even tell you. So it's immensely disturbing. In addition, one more thing. Can you believe there's one more thing about Ivanka Trump that bothers me? This one. Some people have created unrealistic expectations of what they expect from me. Who are these people? Well, the fact is that the some people who created the expectations, they all live in your house, Ivanka. It's you and Jared and maybe your kids. Maybe your father also for a while believed that you might be able to influence him. You weren't able to you can't even influence the guy's fashion. You're a fashionista and the guy's tie dangles between his knees. What's wrong with you? You can't even fix that. Dad, shorten it. Get it specially made. What's the matter with you? You're an idiot. But the idea of saying some people have created unrealistic expectations. Who created these expectations? It wasn't that you're his daughter that we expect you to have influence. Maybe. Maybe. But lots of daughters don't have particular influence over their father's politics or business or anything like that. The people who created the expectation, the people, we don't know who these people are, actually. Though, if to solve that mystery, I would look at the people who said, yes, it is a good idea to make Ivanka Trump a senior White House advisor, an official, honest to God, even though she only takes a salary of $1 or whatever the stupid arrangement is, official senior White House advisor with portal-to-portal car service and secret service coverage that she would get as a family member anyway, but portal-to-portal car service because she's a government official, secure cell phone because she's a government official, traveling everywhere, sitting in her father's seat at the G20 because she can't do anything. Why put that person who literally says, I can do nothing, in that chair? Because it's good for brands. That's it. It's good for the Ivanka Trump brand. Maybe. And it might even be a disaster for that. But okay, she's dumb and she can't tell that it's a disaster. But think about what's happening here. Some people have created this unrealistic expectation. The people who created that expectation are the people who said it's a good idea to make you an advisor and we should do it. Those people are you. I didn't have the idea that it was a good idea to make you a senior White House advisor. Mike Flynn didn't think it was a good idea to make you a senior White House advisor, I'm sure. I did not check with him, but I'm positive he would agree. John Kelly didn't think so. I'm sure Reince Priebus didn't think so. Steve Bannon didn't think so. Nobody wanted you there. Maybe Jared did, possibly, and your father, because you would supervise him. And as Bill in Portland, Maine reminds us, she's the one who comes in and tells him it's time to take his Metamucil. But you can't just, honestly, some people have this expectation. Nobody expected you to be able to do anything, but you overruled them all and said, I am going to take this job as White House advisor. You should have been refusing it with all your might if your father was trying to force it on you. You should have been saying, no. There are many more people, many more qualified people, way more qualified people than me to advise you. The fact that you knew that there weren't is, of course, an admission that you know your father is an absolute train wreck and had no business being president of the United States. And maybe you could have served the country in some way at some point by saying so, but instead you went along for the ride because it's good for your brand. I understand. We understand that. But the idea that some people are the ones who created these stupid expectations. What expectations did you think were going to come with accepting a job as a senior White House advisor? What other expectations could there possibly be? It's in the job, it's in the name of the job. Senior White House advisor. Of course you have influence. No, I don't. Well, then you shouldn't take the job. Senior fry cook, senior fashion consultant, whatever you want. You could have done nothing. And you still would have had walk-in privileges in the Oval Office, and you still could have brought your daughter around, and you still could have gone on all the trips. But you also wanted something official for yourself, and with that comes, you'll be surprised to find out, the expectation that you'll do something, that you'll be capable of something, that you will make some difference, that there will be some impact, that there will be a reason at the end of the day why you were there. Why did we pay to drive you from your stupid house to this other stupid White House and hang around the president? And the answer is nothing. You did nothing. And we all knew you would do nothing. That was the expectation. The expectation that you would actually have an influence was your expectation, your family's expectation. And yet you, like everything else, you project it onto everybody else. It's everybody else's fault that people thought I was capable. I wasn't the one who tried to convince the world that I was capable by asking for and accepting a job as senior White House advisor. That is beyond all reason. I just cannot understand that, and I cannot fathom that privilege. I cannot fathom the privilege of being handed the opportunity and squandering it. It's enraging for 100 million reasons. And that you are a joke of the universe is a just fate. Thank you. I think I'm finished with Ivanka Trump. I was finished with Ivanka Trump a long time ago. I'm not, because there's an additional story. Lots of people writing on this one. I had the Daily Beast story. I'll mention there's the Salon version of this. This is Ivanka Trump has no power as a White House advisor. Obviously true. Taylor Link wrote that one for Salon. I don't know if there's anything that gets added to the situation. They have 2 pieces of auto-playing video, so they're going to get closed right away. And then one last one, which I thought was of some additional interest. Ivanka Trump, whose piece is this? I have to open this up all the way in order to figure this out. Independent Journal Review. Ivanka Trump wasn't about to let Charlottesville ruin her vacation until it became about her. That's that pretty much sums up the situation. And where's our byline here so that I can credit it? It's missing. All right, well, I'll tell you all about it anyway. You have to feel bad for the Republicans harmed by the civil unrest in Charlottesville, Virginia in August. So many of them had their vacations ruined. Remember, she was on vacation. Famously, she's always on vacation. Nobody ever got so much vacation time as a senior White House advisor before in their lives. But no wonder she can't influence him. She's never around. So anyway, lots of them had their vacations ruined. Donald Trump had to interrupt his golf vacation at his New Jersey club to equivocate about many sides on national television. And by the way, the latest news is, yes, he did sign the Senate joint resolution and used the opportunity to double down and reiterate his remarks that both sides were really at fault, immediately ignoring the whole point of the resolution. Not that the resolution was really going to make him say things that he didn't want to. It's good that they put him in this position. It achieved the goals of passing such a resolution, such as could be expected from them. Donald Trump had to interrupt his golf vacation at his New Jersey golf club to equivocate. Paul Ryan had his family camping trip in the wilds of Wisconsin inconvenienced. Then on Thursday, we learned that Ivanka Trump, who was away in Vermont with husband Jared Kushner, the two of them, both senior White House advisors, constantly taking vacations at the same time, of course, because they're married. What arrangement for advising the president could possibly be worse than triple the amount of vacation ever taken by any White House advisor ever being taken in tandem by two of the top advisors, except that it has no impact because he doesn't listen to either of them. So they're in Vermont, and apparently she, for a minute or two, reluctantly dragged herself away from whatever book she was reading in the shadow of the majestic Green Mountains to say something about the actual neo-Nazis who were marching, chanting, and mowing counter-protesters down with their cars. From the Financial Times interview, we find the whole thing, right? Ivanka, here's the part that actually registered with her. Ivanka, meanwhile, attempted to do what she had come on vacation to do, tune out, because her life is so difficult. She cracked open a book. She did not watch her father's press conference as it happened. That's fine. A few days later, she saw a short documentary that Vice News had made about the white nationalists behind the march. In one scene, we discussed this, a neo-Nazi organizer addresses Ivanka and her husband directly, making a leering comment about the hideousness of the president giving his daughter to a Jew. For Ivanka, the documentary made Charlottesville hit home in a way that other White House controversies had not. Seeing those images and hearing Ivanka's name invoked later on obviously made it very personal. Someone familiar with her thinking told me. Still, she made no additional public comments. Now it's about me. I'm upset. Neo-Nazis are, meh. What am I going to do about that? Well, one of them has targeted me and my husband specifically. Well, now I'm angry. This was Tuesday after the president melted down over Charlottesville in a Trump Tower press conference. Before that, Ivanka had fired off a couple of tweets and encouraged her father to take a firmer stance against white supremacists before leaving on vacation. What can one say to this? A woman had been murdered in Charlottesville. Actual neo-Nazis were marching in the streets and threatening people. And Ivanka Trump could not be bothered to speak out, even when she was personally mentioned. This would be fine if she was still Ivanka Trump, business owner and billionaire heiress. It is less fine when she is one of the highest profile advisors to the President of the United States, who happened to be her father. Later in the interview, we learn that some people have created unrealistic expectations, yada, yada. She's literally an advisor to the president. This is all the same point here, I would say. Is it too much to ask that she have some influence on him? Too much to ask that she agree with that a core value of his should not be giving moral cover to white supremacists who are marching in Charlottesville? Is it too much to ask that she recognize the American people did not, in fact, elect her father, but that he slid into office through the creaky, outdated mechanism of the Electoral College, which was originally created to give slave states outsized national influence, and adjust her father's view on the mandate accordingly? By the way, I did think a little bit about this today, about any Democrat elected that way would have been swamped by journalistic and pundit calls for moderation. Of course, you're obviously going to have to govern from the center. You do not have a mandate. Perhaps that was pointless with Donald Trump. To tell him that he's anything less would just be obviously useless to him. It wouldn't have any impact. Anyway, This doesn't tell us anything more at this point. I thought the most important point was her having her vacation interrupted. And speaking of the Electoral College, I should probably put on record the note that, yes, I guess Hillary Clinton now, in the book maybe, or at least as part of the book tour, has gone on record saying, yeah, it's probably time to abolish the Electoral College. And it probably is, although I don't know if she's the best spokesperson for it, given the situation, but don't worry about that, because plenty of other people have recommended it before and will continue to recommend it since, and they can be the spokespeople for that. All right, down to the final few minutes here, and let's see what else I can enter into the record in order for you to be prepared for the weekend. Let's see, this one I can save for next week. Here's a fun story. You may have seen this one in the midday open thread, the Linky open thread over at Daily Kos. This is just sort of like an interesting story. What is wrong with white culture? I don't know if anybody of you have ever asked this question of yourselves, but we really need to look into it. Claire Johnson of the Billings Independent Record, I believe, is that, I'm sorry, the Billings Gazette. For some reason, I'm at the Independent Record is up in the banner here, but there must be more than one of the papers from the area, and they must have a joint website again. But this is the Billings Gazette Claire Johnson works for. Here's a story. Ex-GOP House Majority Leader, I guess he would be the ex-Majority Leader who is GOP. He's not ex-GOP, right? They didn't kick him out of the party. They should. That's what it says, though. Ex-GOP House Majority Leader from Billings pleads guilty to trafficking several pounds of meth. How do you like that? What's wrong with our culture in America? When are white people, where are the moderate whites to speak up against this? Former Montana Republican House Majority Leader, the leader of the state legislature, Michael David Lang of Billings, who once told the governor to go to hell. I don't know why he did that or in what context, but you can read at the link here. Admitted on Tuesday to trafficking several pounds of meth as part of a large drug conspiracy. Appearing before U.S. District Judge Susan Waters in Billings, Lang, 57, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to possess meth for distribution and to possession with intent to distribute. There was no plea agreement. Lang faces a minimum mandatory 10 years to life in prison and a maximum fine of $10 million on each count. U.S. Assistant Attorney John Sullivan, or Assistant U.S. Attorney, said Lang, in interviews with law enforcement officers, admitted to getting about 20 pounds of meth through his co-defendant, Jose Soltero, and distributing it to others. I do not know anything about the political record of Mike Lang as GOP Majority Leader in the state legislature, but I would venture to guess that he was pretty anti-meth, and I wonder whether people thought of him as someone who was, like, say, anti-Jose Soltero of the world. Like, was he welcoming of Central American immigrants in the United States? I don't know whether Jose was an immigrant. He may be American-born. But does anybody know how Mike Lang treated the brown-skinned of our country? Because he's partnering up with them here to sell 20 pounds of meth. What is wrong with just everything in the world at this point? I don't even know how this happens. And of course, had it been a Democrat, we would have heard more about this story. So I feel like it's my duty to bring it to your attention. If they're not molesting children or impregnating their girlfriends and getting them abortions or having otherwise extramarital affairs, they're selling meth. It's just nonstop with these guys. I know it's not all of them, but it's troubling is what I'm saying. Okay, let's see. What else can we get in before we wrap up for the weekend? Let's see. Well, you know what? I'll say this. I'll put this one on record. I don't think we can get all the way through this. Well, I know we can't. But Politico energized me a little bit yesterday. They put up a piece inside Trump's dalliance with Democrats, describing Chuck and Nancy show. Schumer just talks to him. You get Mitch and Paul in there. There's no personal connection, said one White House official. This is Rachel Bate and John Dawsey's piece that I think gave rise to two separate stories. One, Chuck Schumer knows how to schmooze with Donald Trump, and they can make small talk with one another. And apparently that's very important to Donald Trump. He has small hands. Small talk is all he can handle. He likes that, though. He likes to schmooze. He likes to chat. You can't shut the guy up, a little bit like me, I guess. But so he just works well with a guy who'll kibitz with him a little bit. And I guess Nancy Pelosi's got that gift, too. Paul Ryan, not so much. Very dry personality. He says, as a matter of fact, it's reported, I think, in this piece that Trump refers to Ryan as a Boy Scout, which is normally a good thing. But I guess not for Trump, because, you know, Trump tried to talk to actual Boy Scouts and he wanted to tell them orgy stories. I don't know whether Chuck has any, but Paul Ryan apparently doesn't. And that's a good thing, by the way, but apparently it doesn't entertain this president. Mitch McConnell has none of it. The personality, it's a complete blank, and that rubs Trump the wrong way. He can't get along with a person who can't interact, which is amazing because Trump has no interpersonal skills whatsoever. I thought he always says the wrong thing, but he just wants things to be said. It doesn't matter whether they make any sense. And McConnell clams up on him. Is this the story, though? I have to skim it because I don't know whether this is the one or not, but I was very, I guess, pleased to see I'm announcing my endorsement of Donald Trump for president in 2020. He finally has taken a position I agree with, saying that the worst decision he has made in his political career was naming Jeff Sessions as Attorney General and calling him an idiot. And I don't believe this is actually the story that brought that up. I'll have to scan around for that one. I'm sure all of you have seen this. Of course, he only thought it was the worst decision he had ever made because he intended to name Jeff Sessions Attorney General with the idea in mind that if there were an investigation launched or a special prosecutor called for, Sessions would say no to it and block it. And he didn't do that, and so he's an idiot. I do agree that he's an idiot. And that's enough for me, I think, to endorse him for president. Obviously not, really. But it was refreshing to be able to agree with the president once in a while, I guess. And it really wasn't even that either. It actually kind of made me sick to my stomach. But so does Jeff Sessions. And so, you know, what can I do, man? It's the weekend. It's Friday. I can't be tied up with all this important stuff. I gave you enough to think about as it is. It's time now for us to exit from the scene and get ready to hand the microphones over to the guys at the after show, who, as always, are batting cleanup and will tell you all about the other very important stories that we have ignored in favor of the harebrained scheme to spread nuclear material all over the world and leave it under the guardianship of Eric Prince and Blackwater, I believe. Whew. Well, okay, what do we got here? All set for their Friday show are the guys on the after show. Here's what they have lined up for you. Trump wants ESPN to kick Jemele Hill off the air and replace her with another black host, but her colleagues are having none of it. No one wants to take that job, I'll bet. Trump bans the CDC from talking to reporters about even basic facts. And Trump won't stop lying about Susan Rice, even though he has created an even bigger problem for himself, as we learned today, by harping on Susan Rice. He ain't done. He's sure he can nail her. For the last half, the Friday News Dump and Recycling Center, that's news that's been repurposed with a purpose. What do they have on tap? A new study shows cleaning products may increase lung disease. I can feel that. And in a study on American drinking habits, men hate wine while women rarely binge. That's an odd one. All that, plus the Connect, Unite, Act, Daily Coast community calendar, and more on the after show with Wink and Justice coming next. We'll see you next
From
week.
Daily Coast Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks for listening. As always, do visit our patreon.com page, patreon.com/KagroX, in order to sign up to be a monthly contributor to keep us alive and on the air here. And now time for me to retire for the day and go take care of the sick kiddo you might have heard coughing in the background. We hope all is better by Monday. See you then.